What the hell is going on in Yosemite National Park? Yes, it's beautiful, but it also hides some of the most disturbing secrets, stories, and even people in all of American history. And on October 13th, 1995, an anonymous park ranger learned this reality the hard way. It all started in the early morning. Rangers were preparing for the quieter months in Yosemite National Park. You know, the weather was getting colder and the crowds had been kind of thinning out, but something dark and very unexpected was about to shatter all of that peace. That morning, a female park ranger was approached by a random man seeking a ride. Now, this man was middle-aged, he was soft-spoken, and honestly, he appeared pretty harmless at first glance. His name was Phil Lund, and he was a 56-year-old from San Francisco. So he asks this ranger for a ride, and she agreed, which was a decision she would regret almost instantly. While in the vehicle with the ranger, Phil Lund suddenly reached down into his pocket and he pulled out a stun gun. He threatened the ranger with it, and he also tried to put her in handcuffs. The ranger was obviously scared to death. I mean, she was just out here trying to do her job and help one of her park's visitors, but now she's being held up and potentially handcuffed, all while she's trying to drive. But though she was scared, she didn't freeze, she didn't panic, and instead, she dug deep and she found the courage to fight back. In a moment of what I can only describe as sheer determination, she managed to escape the vehicle and obviously alerted her fellow rangers for help. But that didn't stop Phil. He was able to run away on foot and basically just vanish inside the park, which obviously started a massive manhunt, through some of the most rugged terrain in all of California. So all of Yosemite's rangers and law enforcement officers and search teams sprang into action, right? I mean, roads were closed, checkpoints were set up, every single car leaving the park was searched. But despite these tremendous efforts, Lund was not caught, at least not yet. I've been to Yosemite before, as well as a bunch of other national parks, and I can't even imagine the tension that everyone must have been feeling inside the park. Employees and visitors alike were being warned to be cautious because a dangerous fugitive could be lurking around any tree or lurking on any trail. Just absolutely brutal. But then, on October 26th, authorities got a breakthrough in the search. A visitor hiking in the Tenaya Canyon area, which is a remote area east of Yosemite Valley, spotted a man who seemed very out of place. Rangers moved quickly, and this time, there was no escape. Phil Lund was arrested without incident, dirty, exhausted, and all alone. He was charged with kidnapping and assault with a dangerous weapon, and he was held without bail. Now, the ranger that he had tried to kidnap, essentially, turned out okay. She was safe, thankfully. Actually, speaking of thanks, largely thanks to her quick thinking and, of course, the response from law enforcement. And the crazy part is that Phil Lund is far from the deadliest criminal to run rampant throughout Yosemite National Park. And we'll get to the story of who actually is that person a little later in this video, but it turns out that Phil Lund had actually just been released on parole 4 months before this incident after serving 13 years in prison for, I can't say it on YouTube, but SA, you know what I'm saying? He'd even worked in the park decades prior as a concession employee, and of course he knew the terrain very, very well. Even a little too well, you could say. And so he, like many criminals before and after him, thought that he could use the size of the park to his advantage and get away with just a completely despicable crime, right? And fortunately, he was dead wrong. And if you thought that story was crazy, I mean, a park ranger being kidnapped almost, anyways, if you thought that was crazy, you better buckle up, because this next story, I mean, instead of being a tale about a straight up despicable criminal, it's just a straight up mystery. On Labor Day of 2021, Joel Thomason set out on a hike just after dawn. Summer was coming to an end, and he had planned a solo backpacking trip in Yosemite's beautiful backcountry, right? And Joel was actually a U.S. Army reservist, as well as a husband and a father to a 2-year-old boy, very young. He was strong, quiet, and committed to his family, and so This hike was very important to him. It was going to be like a well-earned, peaceful escape from his daily life. He planned to hike from a location called Hetch Hetchy to Lake Eleanor and then to hike back. He even planned on fishing in the lake. I mean, this sounds so amazing, you know, as someone who loves doing this stuff. It sounds so relaxing, but unfortunately, it would turn into a nightmare not just for Joel, but for his entire family and for the entire park at large. Joel packed a bright red inflatable kayak, a yellow backpack, a hammock, good choice, a green sleeping bag, a camp stove, and food sealed inside of a bear-proof container. He even had a steel U.S. Army cup stamped with the year 1918. He crossed over the O'Shaughnessy Dam at around 5 p.m. that night, and a local park ranger even saw him do this. Like, the ranger watched him hike over the dam and then hike on into the nearby forest. Over the next 3 days, Joel's family figured that he was out there having the time of his life, right? I mean, surely he was fishing, hiking, kayaking, and just getting away from the hustle and bustle of his daily life. But by the time that he was supposed to return home on September 9th, he was nowhere to be found. His wife understandably started to worry, and very quickly this worry turned into full-blown panic. Soon enough, search teams mobilized and they started to comb the area for clues. Helicopters swept the skies. They even brought out kayaks to search for this guy. Like, kayaks were scanning the lakes. Search dogs were there, of course, you know, sniffing up and down the trails. Dozens of agencies worked this case, and they expected to find something, right? I mean, maybe his green sleeping bag or his yellow backpack would be easy to spot in the brush, or better yet, that kayak I talked about, maybe that bright red kayak would be impossible to miss from the sky, right? They searched frantically for something, anything that might point them to Joel. His father even came out to search too. He would walk the trails all alone and just call out his son's name, hoping for a sign, which is heartbreaking. But of course, he was also fearing what he might find, which is equally as heartbreaking. And after all of the work that all the different agencies and Joel's family put in, they still never found any traces, no leads. And disturbingly, that's exactly where the search for Joel stands to this day, because he basically walked into Yosemite National Park and never came out. The secret of Joel's fate still lies within Yosemite National Park's borders, and the rangers who searched every inch of those woods know that it's far from the only secret that this park keeps. In fact, just a year earlier, those very same rangers were facing another secret, one that's even harder to explain. But I kind of want to lighten the mood first, because if you can believe it, this video is actually about to get even darker than it's already been. So someone asked me the other day, Kyle, what's your secret to looking this good while living almost exclusively on gas station burritos? The answer, that would be AG1, who's the sponsor of this video. They told me not to make that joke. AG1 just dropped 3 new flavors, which are tropical, citrus, and berry. Tropical tastes like papaya and passion fruit. Citrus is lemon and orange, and berry is blueberry and strawberry, which just so happens to be my personal favorite. 1 scoop, water, shake, done. For me, it's nutritional insurance, right? Multivitamin, pre and probiotic, superfoods, and antioxidants all in one habit. I feel steadier energy, my gut's a lot happier, and I'm filling in those little nutrient gaps. Before AG1, my gut sounded like an old washing machine, but now it's more like a quiet dishwasher. Still there, but manageable. Yeah, we're gonna get in trouble for this one for sure. And folks, this isn't just marketing hype. AG1 Next Gen is backed by 4 clinical studies showing it helps fill nutrient gaps and support gut health. If you've tried other health drinks or even the original AG1 before and didn't love the taste, give the new flavors a try, because they're an absolute game changer and they have no added sugar or artificial sweeteners. And here's the kicker, okay? Use my link below or scan the QR code and get a free $76 welcome kit when you subscribe. That's 5 travel packs, a shaker, canister, scoop, plus your 30-day supply, and vitamin D3 plus K2. All of that for less than $3 a day, which is probably the best offer you're ever gonna hear in a YouTube video. I mean, that's insane, right? And so one more time, hit the link and let AG1 start sponsoring your mornings just like they're sponsoring mine. I told you I was gonna lighten things up a little bit. That was fun, but the fun's over. Let's get back to these crazy stories. In late June 2020, we all remember that time. What a crazy time. Sandra Johnson Hughes, who was a 54-year-old former wilderness ranger trainee, an educator, and a solo hiker, traveled from Hawaii to California in search of solitude among the trees and open sky. Sandra's friends described her as resilient, prepared, and deeply comfortable in nature, which made what happened next all the more unsettling, we'll say. So she set up camp near Johnson Meadows, which is a remote area in Sierra National Forest just south of Yosemite's southern boundary. On June 26th, she sent a message to a friend confirming that she was camping and that she was doing fine. But a few days later, hikers stumbled across her campsite, and what they found didn't really look quite right. Tents and belongings were kind of scattered randomly. Food and dishes looked like they'd been kind of just like thrown around. It looked like someone had just like up and left in a hurry. Hell, I'm even picturing that scene in Tarzan where all the gorillas trash the campsite and start playing around with the typewriters and other human stuff. But obviously my theory doesn't check out because there are no gorillas in Yosemite National Park, or at least that's what they say. No, I'm kidding. Anyways, it was clear that something went terribly wrong in Sandra's campsite. She wasn't the type of person to leave in a hurry or leave a mess like this. And then another horrifying discovery was made just about 5 miles away. Someone had spotted a silver shimmer of light down in a nearby ravine. And as it turns out, this was Sandra's car. Fearing the absolute worst and dreading what they might discover behind the wheel of the car, I think you know where I'm going with this, rangers peeked their heads inside. And when they did this, they were completely shocked. But they weren't shocked by what they found, they were shocked by what they didn't find. I mean, they were pretty much convinced that Sandra was gonna be inside the car and that she was probably gonna be deceased, right? But that's not what happened. She was not in the car. In fact, she wasn't anywhere near the car either. She was nowhere to be found. It looked as if she had just crashed her car and then walked away into the wilderness, which is pretty crazy, sure, but it actually gets even crazier because over that very same weekend, multiple witnesses reported encountering a strange woman in the woods. They said that she was walking barefoot along these remote forest roads and that she had a bruise on one side of her face. Her clothes were dirty and she was just acting bizarre, right? I mean, this woman looked like she'd been through complete hell, but witnesses said that she was oddly calm during these encounters. People even tried to help her, but apparently she denied all of these offers. And eventually, one witness said that she vanished into the woods and she just never looked back. Weeks and weeks of more searching went on before all of a sudden, 2 hunters caught sight of someone leaning against a tree near a Forest Service road. This mystery figure that they saw actually matched Sandra's description. This person was thin, disheveled, and shoeless, completely barefoot. She didn't speak, she didn't call for help, and before the hunters could circle back and figure out what the hell was going on, this mysterious person vanished. And obviously, right after this, a new search was launched in that exact area. Hell, they even brought out the National Guard and specialized trackers, and yet despite a wide sweep of the backcountry and those multiple initial sightings, the forest had gone silent once again. Weeks turned into months, the case quieted, the seasons changed, and Sandra Johnson Hughes was never seen again to this very day. This story is just so strange to me. It leaves me with so many unanswered questions, and so does this next one, actually. And so in September of 2016, a 74-year-old retired educator and experienced hiker named Peter Jackson drove into Yosemite National Park for a solo camping trip. He had reserved site number 58 at White Wolf Campground for 4 nights, and he planned to spend a few quiet days hiking, relaxing, and enjoying the late summer weather. On September 17th, he sent a very brief text message to his son that said, quote, "On my way to Yosemite." This text seemed harmless and simple enough, probably forgettable, but his son would soon think about this one text message in a much more chilling and heartbreaking way. Peter had booked the campsite until September 21st, and so when rangers made their rounds on checkout day, they visited his site and found that his car was still parked there, His tent was still up, and his gear was completely untouched. It looked as though somehow he had simply stepped away from camp and then just never came back, which is very, very strange. And so just like the previous couple stories, they started searching for him, right? More than 50 people covered over 50 square miles of rugged terrain with the help of, you know the drill, helicopters, dogs, even infrared technology. But after 2 weeks, with no leads and a bunch of storms moving in, the search had to be scaled back, which sucks. And that's basically where the search would stall over the course of the next 3 years. With each passing day, that last text message that Peter sent to his son became more and more meaningful, and also more and more mysterious. Peter's loved ones couldn't help but wonder if those were going to end up being his last words. But in August of 2019, trail workers found a faded blue day pack beneath a fallen tree near Akerson Meadow, just over 7 miles away from Peter's campsite. And after they studied the pack a little more, it was confirmed that it was Peter's. It belonged to him. And finally, they had some kind of clue into his disappearance. It might seem like we're leading to some tragic resolution here, but the truth is that sometimes, and I've learned this from making all these videos, sometimes new discoveries only end up leading to more and more questions. And despite a renewed energy in the search after finding this backpack, there has been no other trace of Peter Jackson that's ever been found. Nobody ever saw him again, and yes, that text message, in all likelihood, would end up being his final words. Now, national parks in general, especially massively popular ones like Yosemite, can sometimes feel like a giant playground, right? I mean, we feel safe and secure. There are rangers around, people everywhere. Hell, there's even some like attractions there, kind of. I mean, in some ways, it can almost feel like Disneyland for outdoor adventurers. And this is a side note, but if Yosemite served churros, Mickey Mouse waffles, and a chance to meet Goofy, I mean, I'd move there in a heartbeat, right? You would too. Don't lie to me. You would too. Should we cut it? We'll see. And so it might not be the happiest place on earth, but ultimately it's this exact type of comfort and security that can lull any Yosemite visitor into this false sense of confidence and give us the illusion of safety while we're actually way out in the middle of an untamed wilderness. Case in point, the story of Stacy Arris. I actually made a full video on her story a while back, but it's so significant and baffling that I kind of just have to tell it again, although a little bit differently this time. So in the summer of 1981, 14-year-old Stacy Arris joined her father on a 10-day horseback trip deep in the Yosemite backcountry. Their group rode through miles of rugged terrain before stopping at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, which was this isolated campsite nearly 9,400 feet above sea level. Not long after arriving to camp, Stacy told the group that she wanted to, stretch her legs and go take some photos of the nearby alpine lakes. A 77-year-old man from the group named Gerald Stewart agreed to go on this short little excursion with her. The trail they were going to hike was only about 1.5 miles long, and so nothing too dangerous, and they're out there in the backcountry to see the sights and stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary about this whatsoever. While they were in the middle of their hike, Gerald grew tired and he ended up sitting down to rest. And Stacy decided to continue on alone. It's important to note that the landscape around her was quiet and still, and it was also very open. I mean, there was no dense forests to get lost in. There were no cliffs, at least immediately nearby, that she could fall off. And she was only out on her own for a few minutes. But then time passed, and more time, and more time. Gerald even started calling out for Stacy, but he got no answer in response. They went on to search the trail, and they found nothing. And then a full-on search and rescue operation began with, again, helicopters scanning the area, search dogs combing the mountain, and over 100 people scouring every inch of that camp and every inch of the surrounding wilderness. This intense search lasted 9 exhausting days, and on the 9th day, they found the only thing related to Stacy Arris that they would ever find in this case, which was a single lens cap from her camera. You probably know where I'm going with this by now, but Stacy Arris was never seen again. And how the hell could that be, right? Most people, I'll say, that's a generalization, but most people, for lack of a better way to say it, believe that she might have slipped or fallen in the rugged terrain. And over time, this case gained a lot of attention from, missing persons researchers, podcasters, YouTubers, and even like some conspiracy theorists. And yes, I've told you kind of a shortened version of this story, but the truth is that even the full long version doesn't really help make this case any less baffling. I mean, this is one of the most baffling and heartbreaking mysteries in Yosemite National Park history, and honestly, all of national park history. She basically just vanished in broad daylight, and she trusted the adults around her to kind of keep an eye on her. But now her story is just one that absolutely shatters the illusion of safety in national parks for anyone who hears it. And sadly, she is far from the only victim of this specific kind of outdoors overconfidence, we'll call it. Any collection of stories about missing people, murders, and mysteries in Yosemite National Park would be incomplete if I didn't at least mention the most notorious criminal in the history of the park, who of course is Cary Stayner. And if that name sounds familiar to you, well, it should. Back in 1999, a series of brutal murders shook the peaceful image of Yosemite to its core. 4 women were murdered, and their killer turned out to be a quiet, unassuming handyman working at the Cedar Lodge just outside of the park's borders. Stayner used Yosemite's massive wilderness to his advantage, his sick and twisted advantage. He abducted his victims right from their hotel rooms, then hid their bodies deep in the woods where he hoped that no one would ever find them. The first victims, Carol Sund, her teenage daughter Julie, and their friend Silvina Peloso, went missing for over a month before their burned out rental car was eventually discovered with their bodies inside. Then came Joey Armstrong, who was a young park naturalist whose life was cut short in the very same grim pattern. And what makes this story even more eerie and just crazy is Cary Stayner's family background. His younger brother, Stephen Stayner, was a national hero decades earlier, having survived his own horrific kidnapping and captivity before escaping and returning home. Now, we've all heard of sibling rivalries before, maybe some of us have even been in them, but I don't think I can think of 2 brothers who were less alike than the 2 Stayner boys. I honestly think that Cain and Abel might have had more in common than these 2 did. I won't go too deep into Stayner's story because I've talked about it before, and I'll actually have that video linked in the description if you want the full story, but it is worth mentioning because it perfectly captures how criminals look at a place like Yosemite, and they don't just simply see a beautiful park with tons of peace and nature like the rest of us. Nope. They see a perfect hiding spot, an ideal escape route, and a place to hide their bodies. Thankfully, justice did catch up with Cary Stayner, who's now commonly known as the Yosemite Park Killer, and he was sentenced to death in 2002. Now, our next story is going to be a lot different, and so just bear with me here, okay? On the morning of June 2nd, 2018, 3 men were climbing up the ever iconic El Capitan, which you'll probably remember as the granite rock that Alex Honnold soloed up in the movie Free Solo. Jason Wells, Tim Klein, and Kevin Prince were experienced climbers and close friends. They had all tackled Yosemite's cliffs many times before. In fact, they'd all been up El Capitan before over 100 times. Now, on this particular day, they weren't free soloing like Alex Honnold, later made the wall famous for. No, they had a rope between them, and they were climbing one of El Capitan's lower but notoriously technical sections. As the 3 men climbed up the rock, they did so very quickly. I mean, again, they were super familiar with this route, and they basically felt as comfortable as you can possibly feel while climbing up a sheer granite rock hundreds of feet in the air, which blows my mind, but I'm no rock climber. Anyways, to them, this kind of climb was basically as normal as breathing. They eventually managed to pass a group of other climbers, and after that, Tim and Jason were up above Kevin, and the 2 of them climbed out of view of anyone else. It's reported that one of the climbers in the other group even watched Tim and Jason speed up the wall and remarked that, quote, "Jason sure is a superhero." But as we've been talking about here in these last couple stories, sometimes comfort and confidence can be any superhero's kryptonite. While Tim and Jason were out of anyone's view, They were climbing up a 250-foot section that many climbers have since called the simplest part of this particular climb. Again, I'm not a climber, so I can't speak to that. That's just what people say. But then, all of a sudden, Kevin and the other climbers heard a loud slamming noise, and suddenly they saw Tim and Jason both falling through the air. Because no one saw the initial fall, this part of the story is a little unconfirmed, we'll say, but it's believed that one of the climbers fell first and then the other one was pulled down by the rope that was tied between them. But that doesn't exactly explain the loud slam that the other climbers heard way up on the wall. This is hard to say, but it turns out that after Tim and Jason had begun their sudden free fall, their rope actually caught itself on a boulder, and that actually arrested their fall. For just a brief moment, they had actually been saved, right? But then their nightmare started all over again. The boulder that had stopped their fall suddenly became their greatest threat, basically, and it actually cut their rope in two due to sheer force. I hate telling stories like this, man, but like, you know, now they're free falling once again, right? And this time they would continue to fall the rest of the way, approximately 1,000 feet to the base of El Capitan. And of course, right after this happened, Kevin, who was still high up on the wall all by himself now, called 911. And when he finally got through to someone, he found out that the rescue crews down below had actually already found Tim and Jason. And the voice on the other end of the phone told Kevin the heartbreaking news that both of his friends had died. These deaths sent shockwaves through the climbing community. Both Tim and Jason were skilled and seasoned climbers, and their friends were obviously crushed by their loss and rattled over how such experienced and competent athletes could fall on a route that they had done before, a route that they knew so well. Now, this story obviously involves some riskier adventuring. It wasn't just like a short little day hike, but even the name park in Yosemite National Park can clearly create an image of safety and fun that just isn't the reality when you're going up against big bad Mother Nature. And if you think this climbing story is scary, just wait until later in the video when I tell you about what happened on Half Dome. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I need to tell you about the most dangerous selfie of all time. So back on July 19th of 2011, 3 young visitors made a day trip to Yosemite National Park. 22-year-old Hormuz David, 27-year-old Ninos Yakub, and 21-year-old Romina Badal were among a group of friends and family who had hiked the popular Mist Trail to the top of Vernal Falls, which is a towering 317-foot waterfall along the Merced River. Once they were at the top of the waterfall, these 3 hikers made the biggest mistake of their lives. They decided to disobey the most obvious rule of hiking when they decided to go off trail very close to a dangerous waterfall and cliff. Despite other hikers around them yelling and telling them to get back on the trail, the group seemed to be hell-bent on taking a picture much closer to the edge. Now, I probably don't need to say this, but I'm going to take a small detour in this story to make a public service announcement, we'll say it. Do not ever do what these hikers did. Please stay on marked trails, especially when you're near cliffs or waterfalls. Please, please, please. And even if you've done this in the past and nothing bad happened, there's a pretty strong chance that the next time you won't be so lucky. And look, I'm not trying to like beat up these particular hikers, obviously. But I don't know, dude, this one is just so preventable. I had to say it. So after Hormuz, Ninos, and Romina crossed over the trail barrier, they stepped into knee-deep water roughly 25 feet upstream of the fall's dramatic edge, which is way too close. And once again, other hikers around them were trying to get them to come back. They were crying frantically, "Come back, guys, please, please." But they didn't listen. They hiked onto the slick rocks along the gushing river, also that they could pose for a couple of photos. Now, witnesses say that Romina slipped on the rocks first, and as she began to get swept away, one of the men, the news report I read didn't really confirm which one it was, unfortunately, desperately tried to like reach out and save her, but then he slipped too. And then, in a last-ditch effort, the other man had started walking back to the trail, but seeing his friends in grave danger, he rushed over to try and help. But the current was way too strong at this point. And if any of you out there somehow think you could win a fight against a waterfall, you better think again. All 3 hikers were flung over the edge of the vernal falls, and witnesses said that the 3 of them were actually holding on to each other in a heartbreaking embrace during these final moments. Rangers launched an immediate search and rescue operation. They closed the mist trail as teams combed through the Merced River down below. They did everything they could. I mean, they navigated the same dangerous and fast-moving waters that had caused the hikers to fall in the first place, and they tried to find areas where the hikers might have washed ashore or even climbed to safety. If they were somehow alive, they would obviously need medical attention, so this was a very urgent effort. But despite this urgency, they didn't find them for a long time. Weeks went by before any progress was made, but finally, on August 5th, 2011, the body of Hormiz David was recovered about 240 feet below the base. And then, a while went by, and it wasn't until that winter, on December 3rd, 2011, that Yosemite Rangers located and identified Romina's body in the Merced River approximately 120 yards below the Vernal Falls footbridge, about a half-mile downstream. And then, later that very same day, the final remains of Nino's Yakub was found near the same general area near the footbridge, finally bringing the search for all 3 very young victims to a tragic end. And of course, with that final discovery, that basically closed the chapter of the deadliest selfie in national park history. I feel like I was a little rough on them in this one. I never want to be disrespectful to people who died, and so I apologize. But again, this one was just so preventable. Water and cliffs can be very, very dangerous in the backcountry. And so if you're near either one of those things, or especially if you're near both, please just remember this story. And please be careful. I really hate to see this happen to anyone else. And as if we needed another reminder of the perils of nature, our next story takes place on top of Yosemite's iconic Half Dome and the ever-popular Half Dome cables. If you don't already know, the cables are a 400-foot span of, you guessed it, cables that cover the last steepest ascent on the iconic and infamous Half Dome hike. They're used to help hikers travel up and down the treacherous granite. I've never done this particular hike, but it looks pretty gnarly from the photos I've seen. I know it's pretty popular too, and these cables obviously help keep people safer. It's a pretty genius man-made invention, but sometimes nature has other ideas. On the morning of July 31st, 2011, which was just a mere 12 days after the tragic accident at Vernal Falls, stormy weather had swept over the Half Dome area. I'm talking lightning, thunder, and heavy rain, all of these things persisting for several hours. And as these conditions developed, the granite slabs along the cables section of the Half Dome hike had become treacherously slick. As you could probably guess, wet rock, metal cables, and again, this is a very popular hike, tons of day hikers, sounds like a pretty clear recipe for disaster. Enter Haley LaFlame, who was a 26-year-old woman who just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time on this particular day. She had been hiking Half Dome with her sister and her 2 friends. They had trudged through the stormy weather all day, but they didn't let the rough conditions or the posted trail warnings discourage them from making it to the top of this, again, iconic Yosemite hike. The group used the cables to make it to the top, and after spending some time enjoying a very gloomy version of the view, they started their descent back down. As they slowly eased their way down the cables, they began to realize just how slick and slippery the granite had become. And experienced hikers and climbers know this, but an underrated part of climbing any mountain is just how tricky and technical it can be to get back down. Like, a lot of people focus on getting up. Like, that's the objective. You want to reach the top. It's harder physically to go uphill, but once you're there, you're only halfway. You have to get back down, and yeah, a lot of people underestimate that. And so at one point during the descent, Haley placed one foot on the slick granite, and it slid. Her hand then lost the cable, and in a single horrifying moment, her friends watched, completely terrified, as she fell 600 feet down the rock face before finally landing. And with that, the success of their climb was instantly shattered. And what was meant to be a lifelong memory for these 4 friends had turned into an absolute nightmare. For some reason, the falls really get me, man. Like, I've told so many stories like this at this point on this channel, but like, it still hits me every time. Anyways, park rangers arrived on scene and they did end up getting to Haley, but by the time they reached her, it was too late and she was pronounced dead on arrival. And her death marked the 14th fatality in Yosemite National Park that year, which was a very startling surge compared to the typical average of, say, 5 or 6 deaths by late July. It's clear that there is very little margin for error on this trail, even in good weather, but of course in bad. And yeah, I mean, in wet conditions, the granite has virtually no traction and one single misstep can prove fatal. That's all it takes. And that's exactly what happened in Haley's case. May she rest in peace. And guys, please leave some love for her and the rest of the victims I've talked about today in the comments below. I always appreciate how respectful you guys are with your comments. And if you happen to make it all the way to the end of the video like this, then I'm gonna assume you enjoyed it. I don't know why you would watch the whole thing if you hated it. And so subscribe, please. We're trying to get this channel to 1 million subscribers and we have a long ways to go. So I would really, really appreciate that. And if you think that these stories were terrifying yet morbidly interesting, then maybe you'd like this video too. So give it a click, and I appreciate all of you so much for watching.